Chapter 341. Take a day off. Sorry, everyone. I'm just too busy today. The recent chapters need more polishing, so Xiao Di has no choice but to take a day off. Sorry. I want to present a different Goblet of Fire, a different story, but that really takes time. Rushing it out would be disrespectful, slipshod, and misleading. Sorry. I hope you all understand. To be honest, I've already written about 4,000 words that could be published now, but it's just too rushed. Putting out unpolished chapters would be like splitting hairs and still missing the target by a mile. Sorry. On the second floor of the castle, a long, quiet corridor ran between Madame Pomfrey's office and the moving staircases. Midday light poured through the windows, throwing shifting patches of sun and shadow across the flagstones. Eno stood in the infirmary doorway when he spotted Hermione and Ginny walking side by side down the hall. It made his chest flutter a little. Harry might take things stoically, but he had his lucky breaks, and Ginny's steady care was certainly one of them. Hermione saw him first and broke into a surprised, pleased smile. "Eno," she called, the sound bright in the corridor. Her stride quickened. She fell into step with Ginny, glancing back for confirmation as she explained, "I'm with Ginny. She doesn't seem herself, and I wanted to bring her." "As a friend, you're doing the right thing," Eno said, reading her at once and waving the remark away. By the time he spoke, Ginny had caught up and reached the infirmary entrance. "Good morning, Mr. Swinburne," she said, anxious but polite. "Just call me Eno," he answered easily. He'd known the Weasley twins well enough. He hadn't had many chances to speak with Ginny alone, aside from that notebook incident their second year. "If you want to see Harry, now's a good time. He's asleep, but if more people arrive, Madame Pomfrey will limit visitors. Don't worry, he's not badly hurt." Eno admired Ginny's resolute loyalty. It made him smile. He was too obvious about it, apparently, because Hermione gave his boot a quick nudge. He glanced up to find Hermione pretending to study the ceiling, and Ginny couldn't help but chuckle into her hand. Relieved at the news that Harry wasn't badly harmed, Ginny gave Hermione an encouraging look and went into the infirmary. Once the door closed and the corridor fell quiet, Hermione asked, "Is he really all right?" "For now." Eno replied with a small nod. Then Hermione tilted her head and added earnestly, "I haven't congratulated you yet. Getting a perfect score was well earned." "It was just a bit of luck," Eno said modestly, smiling back. They stood there for a while, watching one another. The world narrowed to the two of them until the hush was broken by the infirmary door opening again. They turned as one. Professor Snape stood framed in the doorway, uncharacteristically awkward, frozen between entering and leaving. Hermione recovered instantly and stepped forward. "Good afternoon, Professor Snape." She felt a complicated gratitude toward him, if not for the two-way mirror, then for the bottle of Felix Felicis she'd found in potions. Looking back, a pattern emerged, and the common thread was the potions master in his long robes. To spare him any further awkwardness, Hermione slipped her hand into Eno's and subtly steered him away down the corridor. He had no time to say anything before she pulled him along. Snape watched them go, still standing for a moment before he moved on. Hermione kept hold of his hand as they walked, not letting go. When Eno realized she was leading, he didn't protest. Instead, he tightened his grip a fraction, turning the half-hearted clasp into a deliberate, companionable touch. The shift felt natural, as if it had been set in motion from the moment he'd accepted the Felix Felicis. Small debts and quiet favors seemed to change the shape of things. Hermione's face softened with the warmth of his hand. They walked slowly, footsteps matching, until Eno finally spoke. "For the time being, if you can, try not to get too close to Harry." "Because of the unforgivable curses?" Hermione looked up, startled, then paused. "Can the dark arts do that much with just one use?" "No, there are other reasons," Eno said, deliberating for a moment. He decided to trust her with the truth. "Hermione, there's something you should know, but it's best if it stays between us." He stopped, and his voice dropped. "Harry's changed a little. It isn't really him. It's like a dark arts affliction." He sketched out the situation as best he could without naming Voldemort or the Horcruxes, explaining how unpredictable Harry had been, how dangerous the change could be. Hermione's eyes widened, her cover of composure cracking into stunned alarm. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. She had thought it was only an emergency. She hadn't expected anything like this. Her expression snapped toward the infirmary. Ginny's still inside. She pictured Snape leaving before they did and imagined Ginny alone with Harry. Eno hurried to reassure her. "It hasn't come to that," he said. "Madame Pomfrey gave him a sleeping draught. He won't wake for a while." Hermione fell silent for a moment, then asked in a small, unsteady voice, "But doesn't Professor Dumbledore know? Has he thought of a way to help?" Hearing Dumbledore's words, Eno didn't know how to answer. To be honest, given the way things stood, he had no idea what the old headmaster was thinking. One thing, though, seemed certain. Dumbledore had probably made a mess of things. He had openly used an unforgivable curse in front of all the teachers and students of Hogwarts and before the foreign guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. That was no small matter, whether for England, for Hogwarts, or even for Harry himself. Rumor could be terrifying. It could raise someone to godlike status or drag them into the abyss. Faced with Hermione's worried look, Eno decided to reassure her. After a moment, he said, "Professor Dumbledore knows what's going on, and I'm sure he has a plan. This is beyond what we can handle right now, but you should keep Corvus's feather with you at all times. Don't hesitate to use it if you need to." Hermione relaxed a little on hearing that, though she paused when she heard which feather he meant. Then she nodded. "All right, I'll carry it with me." He noticed the momentary blank in her expression. "Phoenix feathers are just tools, not treasures," he added quickly, trying to ease her hesitation. They fell silent at the same time because a crowd had appeared at the end of the corridor. Ron, Neville, Seamus, Colin, George, Fred, a whole cluster of familiar faces clearly there to visit Harry. Hermione instinctively tried to withdraw the hand she had been holding, but the grip tightened instead. The second-floor corridor was long and open, so the Gryffindor group spotted them easily. George was the first to make a show of it, letting out an exaggerated, "Wow!" and grabbing Fred's hand. The twins moved as one, walking to the front and raising their linked hands, waving as if putting on a performance. Hermione lowered her head, shy in the face of their antics. "Hello, everyone," she murmured. Eno greeted them naturally. "Ginny's in there too, but I'd suggest going in batches. Otherwise, Madame Pomfrey will have you all kicked out." Fred jumped in at once. "Then let Ron and his classmates go first. I just remembered something." Before he could finish, George waved a hand theatrically. "You lot clearly need specially made straw rings," he declared. Colin had been standing quietly to the side, neither joining the group going into the ward nor stepping forward to banter like the twins. At the edge of the corridor, he glanced at the camera hanging from his chest, then looked at the hands clasped between Eno and Hermione. During a lull in George and Fred's chatter, he found the courage to speak. "Excuse me, Mr. Swinburne, may I take your picture?" Through his contacts at the Daily Prophet, Colin had learned a little about journalism. Except for special circumstances, it was proper to ask for a subject's permission before taking a photo, unlike the days when he'd snap anything in the castle. Eno smiled. "Of course, the most professional reporter in the castle," he teased. Colin fumbled with his camera, thrilled. He had a bright, earnest face as the shutter clicked. "Thanks. Some of these I might send to the Daily Prophet," he said hesitantly, clearly seeking approval. "Go ahead," Eno replied, glancing toward Hermione as if asking her consent too. Hermione nodded demurely, ladylike in both posture and the tiny smile tugging at her mouth. Time slipped by. After Colin finished taking his photos, Eno chatted briefly with Fred and George, then left the second-floor corridor with Hermione. They parted at the stair landing, just as Cedric and Cho had done, each going toward their own common room on different floors. Slytherin Dormitory. As soon as the door closed behind him, Eno disappeared. Back in his refuge in Shelter Valley, he pulled out Ravenclaw's diadem and placed it on his head. The familiar coolness flowed through him like a stream of cold water cutting the heat of summer, bringing calm and clarity. In that state, images and memories began to surface. From the summer of his third year, he replayed every frame he had cataloged, every second observed as an outsider. He sifted through not only his own experiences, but also scenes from the original story lodged deep in his memory. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, he took the diadem off and sighed. The last image to linger was the moment the goblet of fire was lit, and Barty Crouch Sr. staggered, pale and weak. That didn't mean Crouch Sr. had been swapped. What the diadem had brought to mind was someone who barely appeared in the original narrative but had been crucial: Barty Crouch Jr. Barty Crouch Jr. was a strange case, almost outside the main story. Unlike people such as Sirius or Lupin, whose roles would shift as the tale at Hogwarts changed, Crouch Jr. had managed to free himself, breaking an Imperius curse with help from Winky the house elf, while the Ministry was distracted preparing for the Quidditch World Cup. That explained why, no matter how the Hogwarts story bent or changed, Barty Crouch Jr. often remained largely untouched. When the time came for him to run, he always did. Chapter 344, Bloody Letter, Rumors of the Second Generation of the Dark Lord. In Shelter Valley, Eno sat against an oak tree cradling the diadem. Recent thoughts had clarified many things that had been fuzzy before. Since Harry's dream during the summer holidays, it now seemed likely that Barty had already been in league with Lord Voldemort. Otherwise, with Voldemort's ability, he wouldn't have been able to get away with so much less kill a muggle. And the later events, the Quidditch World Cup night, the interruptions by Dumbledore and Newt, Pettigrew's death, and whatever else, made it even clearer. Barty hadn't been the one to create the original story's chaos on his own. Taken together, with the confirmation that Mad-Eye Moody was genuine at the start of the school year, everything started to fit. If not for the Ravenclaw diadem, Eno might have missed Barty entirely. The biting dog never barks, he muttered, and sighed. Unlike the loud and unrestrained Bellatrix, Barty truly deserved his reputation: 12 NEUTs, a sharp mind, and formidable strength. Moody was a good example, an auror forged by battle, not someone a single opponent could easily topple. At Hogwarts, the hospital wing was overflowing. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., and Snape, among others, had gathered outside a bed. "Albus, have you found anything?" McGonagall asked softly, disbelief and worry in her voice. She still couldn't accept the idea that Harry had secretly taken up the dark arts, let alone killed a dragon at 15. Not yet. "But I believe Harry is innocent," Dumbledore said slowly, his pale eyes sweeping the room, weary. His examinations had turned up nothing, no trace of a curse, nothing to explain the killing curse. That meant Harry had no physical evidence to excuse himself. He could only face public scrutiny alone. McGonagall released a long, helpless sigh. "Innocent? That requires proof." Barty Crouch Sr. couldn't help but insist. "Shut up! Can't you see my student is resting?" McGonagall bit back, anger threaded through her whisper. "I'll let him rest then. I'll wait." Barty, clearly irritable, turned and strode from the room without a backward glance. Bagman hurried to smooth things over. "Minerva, don't be angry. He wasn't like this before. Trust me, I'll help sort this out." For a moment, Bagman only wanted to find Marcus and renegotiate the sales split. As head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, he was beside himself over the Triwizard Tournament. Dumbledore said nothing, only watched Barty's retreating form thoughtfully. Harry, meanwhile, slept on, apparently unaware of the storm gathering around him. Time, like fine sand, slipped by with faint traces. On the second morning after the contest, the whole of Britain seemed to explode. The Daily Prophet ran a half-page, bold-headed story, The Savior and the Killing Curse. Beneath it, a 5-inch black-and-white photograph. Harry, expression blank, wand extended toward a Hungarian horntail. The dragon, a massive, terrifying beast, lay motionless, as if it had been dosed with gallons of sleeping draught. Savior and Killing Curse together dredged up memories for wizards over 25, a frightening echo of darker times. The Prophet even bundled that day's paper with a little moving picture mirror. One tier of the paper stayed at the usual price. Another, with the 2-inch mirror, jumped to 5 sickles. Despite the markup, the spectacle, and the headline would sell. People liked to watch a sensation, and 5 sickles wasn't that much to pay. In the Slytherin dormitory, Eno folded the paper and looked at Draco. "You said someone spreading that Harry is the second Dark Lord?" Draco nodded, face serious. "Yes. Last night, someone found a blood-stained letter in the 4th-floor corridor. It read, 'Homage to the second Dark Lord, Harry Potter, Your Excellency.'" Eno listened in silence. The whole thing sounded like a bad story, ridiculous, almost implausible, but absurdity often found its audience. The more outrageous the claim, the more people would talk about it. If the rumor spread, Harry would be crushed by a tide of public censure. This wasn't like the Chamber of Secrets and talk of the heir of Slytherin in the original tale. This was different. Harry had apparently used the killing curse in plain view, and a film mirror had recorded it. Strength, background, fame, all of the things that made a person culpable in the court of public opinion were stacked against him. And with no Dark Mark or Quidditch World Cup chaos to remind people of Voldemort, their ire naturally turned toward Harry. The dorm fell quiet. Draco, who had spent 3 years tormenting Harry, suddenly felt the world tilt. The boy he'd bullied might be the next Dark Lord. He'd even been left hanging in midair by him once. The thought made him shiver. Eno, is Scarhead really that dangerous? Don't overthink it, Eno said, frowning. Just don't go provoking him. Draco's reaction was understandable, and it reflected the attitude many of the younger wizards held. Words could make or break someone. If Harry had to live in that atmosphere, he might be ruined by rumor alone. This time, the threat wasn't limited to within Hogwarts walls. Eno looked at the paper again and felt a cold certainty. Dumbledore had truly bungled this one. The headmaster's authority had always been strongest inside the castle. Once he stepped outside, he always seemed on the defensive. Now, with film footage, tabloid fury, a blood-stained letter, and clumsy Dark Lord gossip, the situation risked spiraling out of control. After a long moment, he rose. Draco, do you really think a wizard who can earn 12 NUTs is someone to underestimate? Before Draco could answer, Eno was already heading out. He had to warn Dumbledore before things grew any worse. Phew, it's been a real brain burner lately, but Xiao tries his best to write every chapter well. Chapter 345, Prepare for a Rainy Day, Hogwarts Industry. Perhaps it was the nature of snakes, or simply Salazar Slytherin's preference. The Slytherin common room, set deep beneath the castle, always seemed to wrap its occupants in a heavy, intimate quiet. Eno rose, stood motionless for a few seconds, then settled back into his chair. A thought had come to him, a reminder of the castle's murals. Besides the common rooms, murals decorated the corridors everywhere. If not for that bloody letter, it might all have passed. With that letter, Dumbledore could easily trace the sender. Unspooling the clues would have put him on alert. Realizing that, Eno felt the rush leave him. Whoever was hiding was targeting Harry. They probably wouldn't try to destroy the castle or harm others indiscriminately. Harry already had plenty of people around him. Besides, going to Dumbledore now would be nothing more than meddling born of boredom. Relaxing into the high-backed chair, Eno changed to a more comfortable position. Draco, have you decided on a name for the monthly magazine? We've got at most a month left. If everything goes well, you could even publish early. Now is a good time. Draco was momentarily stunned by the abrupt change of topic. After a few seconds, he stammered, I have a name. Hogwarts Past. The magazine won't cover news. It will re-examine events from the past. Eno perked up. Mining old stories for new content was like being a bard. That's brilliant, he said. When you graduate, you can hand it to the next Slytherin. You could even do a companion piece called England Past. That would be excellent. England Past? Draco's eyes danced as if the idea had sparked something, but the glow faded quickly. That's really good, but I can't even get Hogwarts Past off the ground. It feels too simple to start. He sounded frustrated. The idea had been born of interest, but turning it into reality had proven slow. He'd become Hogwarts' unofficial newsgatherer, but printing and selling a magazine felt far away. I ordered equipment, but I don't have enough staff. They're all students. If someone will work for me, where would they work? The common room won't do. Abandoned classrooms mean filch, and outside the castle there are too many prying eyes. These were his complaints. Eno cut him off decisively. Those are minor issues, he said, ignoring Draco's surprised look. I have a reliable little workforce, and I can arrange a classroom in the castle where you won't be disturbed. Besides the headmaster, you can control who comes and goes. That's incredible. Draco jumped to his feet, elated. Having news but no way to print it had been torture. Don't get too excited. I have conditions. Eno tapped the armrest lightly. Tell me. I'll agree to anything, Draco blurted, earnest. Eno leaned forward, raising 2 fingers. 2 conditions. First, the venue. I can find a suitable place, but the castle is not mine. You must pay Hogwarts a rent. That is non-negotiable. The idea of rent was one Eno had thought through carefully. Hogwarts, a 1,000-year-old school, was governed by a board of 12 governors because nearly all castle expenses came from external funding. It was absurd that such a vast institution, with its castle, the Forbidden Forest, the Black Lake greenhouses, and more, had no independent source of income. Call it funding politely, call it charity frankly. If the benefactors withdrew support, Hogwarts might not even be able to pay the professors' salaries. That very reality had allowed Dumbledore to be challenged in the Basilisk affair. Ordinary people assume the headmaster is the most powerful figure, but that depends on the headmaster's stature. Replace a famous headmaster with an ordinary one, and the governors could assert their power easily. Eno also remembered how Draco, when he was younger, always spoke as if his governor father owned the castle. It was a habit from home. Unfortunately, Draco had met a headmaster like Dumbledore and lost the family's sway in the end. When Eno's name had appeared in the Book of Admittance, he had thought about developing Hogwarts to reduce its reliance on outside control. Back then, he had pictured developing the Forbidden Forest and expanding greenhouse cultivation. Now, by coincidence, Draco's magazine idea suggested a different kind of campus industry. Even a little income could fund simple improvements, magic lamps along the new student's path, for example. When Eno mentioned only rent, Draco agreed immediately. No problem. Rent, anything. What's the second point? Eno waved a hand in no hurry. The second isn't urgent. It concerns wages for my workers. I'll introduce them to you once we secure a place. Then he stood. Where are you going? Draco asked. To see Professor McGonagall and set the rent, Eno said, snapping his fingers. His robe on the hanger obediently flew over his shoulders. When it came to running the castle, the deputy headmistress was often more reliable than the headmaster. They left the Slytherin common room and followed the stairs toward McGonagall's office. Along the way, Eno received unusually many polite greetings, more than usual. It was probably the hand-holding from yesterday. People loved to spread such things. He didn't care. Unless he intended to end up like Dumbledore, single for life and having grandmothers establish a Dumbledore Study Society in his honor, this sort of gossip was inevitable sooner or later. Chapter 346, Professor McGonagall, Legal Contract, 6th floor of the castle. Transfiguration Office. Professor Minerva McGonagall sat alone at her desk, the wariness of the last 2 days weighing on her. What should have been a routine Triwizard tournament had, through a series of mishaps, become a scandal. How the foreign press would spin it remained to be seen, but she did not expect flattering headlines. It was frighteningly possible that Hogwarts might end up regarded as the most tolerant of dark arts among European schools. Just thinking about it gave her a headache. She sighed and rose, moving to the window to stare out across the grounds. The Black Lake lay frozen in winter. The Forbidden Forest looked bleak and distant. The familiar view steadied her. A firm rap sounded at the door. "Come in," she called, collecting herself and flicking her wand to open the door. "In the afternoon, Professor," said Eno as he entered, smiling. He had only been by once before, during the Animagus incident, but this visit felt different. McGonagall looked more worn than usual. There was a tired set to her shoulders that he hadn't seen before. "Eno," she said, surprised but quickly regaining her customary briskness. "You're a busy young man. It's very kind of you to call on me." "You flatter me, Professor," he replied calmly. "Regardless of how busy I am, I'm still a student." That she managed a small joke was, to him, a sign of approval. "Well then, excellent pupil, what brings you here? Aside from your animagus business, you don't usually drop in." Eno pulled a chair forward and explained the plan. Draco wanted to start a monthly magazine, something for entertainment in student life. He spoke through the idea in a few minutes. McGonagall listened, leaning back and folding her hands, her face adopting that thoughtful expression she used when weighing new ventures. After a moment, she nodded. "In principle, I agree," she said. "But one thing you must understand before you go any further. You may write what you like, but the magazine must not involve the professors, at least not excessively. If you make them a focus, you will put me in an impossible position." She watched him while she spoke. In her decades at Hogwarts, she'd seen many youthful enthusiasms, newspapers, clubs, short-lived enterprises. Most were bright bursts of fancy that quickly faded. If it weren't for Eno's manner, sensible and steady, she might never have entertained the idea. Still, she was prepared to give her blessing with that one firm condition. "You have my word," Eno said without hesitation. "Students' private affairs and petty grievances will be the focus. Professors won't be dragged in. Now and then, if something truly crosses the line, we might mention it briefly, but it won't be the magazine's purpose." McGonagall's expression softened with approval. Had he pledged total omission of staff, she would have suspected evasiveness. "Very well. You may proceed. I will give you the authority." She rose, opened a desk drawer, and took out a fresh sheet of parchment. With a practiced hand, she wrote and signed, setting a seal at the top, the Hogwarts crest stamped clearly above the text. When she pushed the parchment across the desk, Eno stared for a beat. He had expected to haggle about terms, perhaps the rent or formalities, but the professor had been decisive. "Professor," he said, somewhat awkwardly, "you haven't mentioned anything about rent. This won't be a Hogwarts project. There must be some rules." McGonagall considered him for a moment and then smiled wryly. "You're right to be thorough. It should be on record." 2 hours later, Eno left the office clutching the parchment. The document looked every inch a contract, Hogwarts crest at the top, McGonagall's signature beneath it, and near the middle, neatly written, the fee, 7 galleons per year in rent. He couldn't help a small, private amusement at McGonagall's surprised expression when he'd insisted on addressing rent. Apparently, in her experience, students didn't often offer to pay for use of castle space. The parchment felt ordinary to the touch, but there was a peculiar weight to it now. The crest, the signature. In a world of magic, a formal contract carried real binding power. With that document, his venture had a legal foundation beneath the castle's protection. Not even Dumbledore could easily tear that up without cause. The paper seemed to hum with a faint connection to the building itself. An anchor, fragile but true. 7 galleons a year wasn't much, but the point was principle. A start. As one of Europe's great schools, Hogwarts having its own small enterprise, even a modest one, felt like a seed. Small sums could become larger with time. Maybe one day, Hogwarts might stand financially independent in ways they hadn't before. Back in the dormitory, Draco saw the parchment and immediately lost all restraint. His grin was broad enough to be contagious. "Eno, this is brilliant. Truly." He paced the room in jerky bursts of excitement, alternately impatient to get dressed and to dash out, then suddenly remembering letters that needed to be written to suppliers for printing equipment. "We should find premises right away. I'll write to get the presses and supplies sent. We can't wait until Christmas. There's been too much going on at the castle. We should have the first issue out as soon as possible." Eno relaxed into a chair and sketched his plan more coolly. Though his meeting with McGonagall had stretched to 2 hours, only about half an hour was spent on the contract and rent. The rest had been McGonagall's account of the last 2 days, Barty Crouch Sr.'s overzealous behavior, the near all-night vigils in the hospital wing corridor. Eno had sat and listened, storing details. Getting the magazine out quickly had another appeal. It would be a chance to shine a light on injustice. If Barty Crouch Sr. proclaimed himself the unflinching guardian of fairness and yet behaved with double standards, there was an audience, and the Hogwarts youth were the first audience they needed. Once the students knew, news spread fast in that small world. If the magazine could expose hypocrisy without dragging professors into its pages, it might do more than entertain. It might hold the powerful to account. Chapter 347, Changes Brought by Time. Time flows like water. Changes wrought by it often happen so slowly you scarcely notice them, like a reflection in a pond blurring as ripples spread. In 3 days after the first task, the castle felt a little different. Small things had shifted and taken on new shapes. The most visible sign was a new monthly magazine called Hogwarts Past. Its headquarters had been set up in an abandoned herbology greenhouse outside the castle, and the magazine was hosted by Draco Malfoy of Slytherin. Of course, a publication's surroundings don't make it good. Content does. The first issue of Hogwarts Past was almost perfect. It cataloged the castle's petty dramas, rejected confessions, caught dates, who was seen holding hands, in a sharp, humorous style that made reading it irresistible to every young witch and wizard, whether they'd been involved or not. It also covered hot topics of the day: the Goblet of Fire, the Champions, and of course, Harry Potter. One article in particular, titled "The Mask of Hypocrisy," drew attention. It named Barty Crouch Sr., one of the ministry's senior department heads, and his son, Barty, as its main subjects. Ordinary papers might never have dared tangle with a man of Crouch's rank, but when readers flipped to the last page and saw the bylines, Swinburne and Malfoy, there was no stopping it. "Barty Crouch Sr. is going too far." Ron exploded in the Gryffindor common room, tossing the magazine aside. "He's hounding Harry for what reason? Claiming fairness? He should look in a mirror." His complaint carried through the room. Time had dulled some of the dread people felt toward the killing curse. Even though Harry had used it publicly against a dragon, the horror of the spell was beginning to fade. Yes, Harry messed up, but two-faced men like that have no right to point fingers, Neville said quietly, surprising some by how plainly he spoke. When Neville spoke, others tended to listen. Only when he finished did Seamus and Ron pick up the argument again. Gryffindor's conversation wasn't unique. Similar debates were happening across all four houses. Draco had printed 400 copies of the first issue and distributed them free to each common room. Public opinion fermented quickly. Barty Crouch Sr. found it increasingly awkward to move around the castle. Wherever he went, someone had a sarcastic remark waiting. There were even jokes that Hagrid's hounds barked at him. At that moment, Barty Crouch Sr. sat alone in Dumbledore's office. He looked thoroughly discomposed, running a hand through the thinning hair on his head. "Albus, I feel like I've lost a lot of memories. Someone used a memory charm on me," he said, voice tight. Dumbledore didn't answer right away. He glanced at the glossy copy of Hogwarts Past on his desk, considered it a moment, and then asked quietly, "I'm curious, what it says true? Did you swap Barty out back then?" "I don't know," Crouch answered honestly, with no attempt to hide it. "I can't even remember having a son." The lapse convinced him his memories had been tampered with. He had an indistinct recollection of a son once, and of pride in that son's achievements. "Albus, help me. If what this magazine says is true, I could be finished. But whatever it takes, you must catch him, dead or alive." There was a painful resolve to Crouch's words. He had been the iron disciplinarian who led Aurors and headed the Department of Magical Law Enforcement during Voldemort's rise, a pillar to many ordinary wizards thanks to his harsh, uncompromising methods. Dumbledore looked at him in silence. He understood the conflict Crouch felt between loyalty and principle. The difference was that Crouch had ultimately chosen emotion over idealism. "I cannot interfere in ministry affairs," Dumbledore said gently. "Everyone must answer for their own actions. But rest assured, Barty's case will be taken very seriously." Crouch breathed a sharp, relieved sigh. "That's all I needed to hear. Tell me what you need to know before the ministry comes for me. And one more thing. Whatever happens, I will take responsibility for Harry's case." It was the only sensible course for a man with Crouch's instincts. Having discovered his memories might have been altered, he'd already smelled a conspiracy. Connected to the week's other events, there was a clear aim behind it. To foil the plotters' plans, he was prepared to shoulder blame himself. Dumbledore rose and walked to the cabinet where he kept sweets. The door opened, and a shallow stone basin floated out, a pensieve. It was carved with ancient runes and symbols, its surface filled with a silver, cloud-like substance that looked part liquid, part gas. Dumbledore's expression softened as he addressed it. "Old friend." "A memory charm isn't always irreversible," he said, turning back to Crouch. "Unless it was cast by someone exceptionally skilled, ordinary memory charms can be examined and sometimes restored in a pensieve. Those truly proficient in memory charms, if they've acted unlawfully, should be where the ministry puts its worst offenders." Pensieves were rare items, used only by the most powerful or careful of wizards. Few dared to indulge in them. Dumbledore set the pensieve down and prepared to work, the silver mist stirring as if waiting to show what it contained. The headmaster's office on the 8th floor smelled faintly of lemon and old parchment. Portraits of past headmasters lined the walls, each canvas a little world of its own, sometimes reminiscing about former glories, sometimes pretending to nap. They watched the room's visitors with the steady, imperturbable gaze of portraits that had seen far worse than any passing storm. Inside, a silvery, ribbon-like strand of memory drifted into the pensieve. With Barty's consent, Albus Dumbledore bent over to examine the man's recollections. Time slipped by, minutes felt like hours. When Dumbledore finally straightened, the placid expression he usually wore was gone, replaced by a grave seriousness. "He was unbelievably reckless," he murmured. Barty's face, by contrast, showed something like terror. He's really been resurrected," he whispered. The memory fragments had turned Barty's world upside down. Someone everyone believed dead had been brought back through ritual magic, and that someone had used parts of Barty himself in the ritual. Dumbledore held his silence a moment, then raised a hand. "Sit quietly," he told Barty. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts settle. In the vision Barty had shown him, Lord Voldemort's restoration had required blood forced from Barty, flesh that Barty had given willingly, and the bones of Voldemort's Muggle father. Dumbledore pulled open a desk drawer. Inside lay a heavy, black-bound book, Secrets of the Dark Arts. As headmaster of Hogwarts and one of the century's most learned wizards, Dumbledore knew Horcruxes and the arts that meddled with soul and body. The resurrection had been a macabre reconstruction. Blood, flesh, bone, a new vessel made whole into which a Horcrux-born soul could be poured. Dumbledore understood the mechanics well enough. He had long assumed Voldemort would have preferred to use Harry's blood. Only the Potter blood, with Lily's protection running through it, could both confound and be conformed to Voldemort's needs. Otherwise, the Dark Lord would risk leaving an obvious vulnerability. After all, Voldemort's character, he would not have left such a flaw. He would have taken the means to bind Harry's life to his own. Yet Barty's memory told a different story, and Dumbledore felt a cold knot of miscalculation tighten in his chest. He had been trying to protect Harry by waiting for the right moment, but perhaps his plan had been flawed from the start. Why, then, had Voldemort chosen this grotesque route? Dumbledore could not answer immediately. The memory left him unsettled and full of questions. Far to the north, some 140 kilometers offshore, on an uninhabited reef island, a weather-worn lighthouse sheltered a far darker scene. "Master, I do not understand. Why did you spare him? He had no ties to me any longer." Barty felt guilty. Voldemort could have killed him outright, ended a potential liability, but had instead erased his memories. That mercy, whatever its motive, made Barty bow with something like reverence. Before him sat a figure carved of darkness and cunning, a pale, twisted face, a flat, snake-like nose, and a cold, cruel smile. Red eyes glinted with slaughter and intellect. "Barty, my child." The voice was refined, old London, cultured, and utterly chilling. Voldemort glanced first at the tea on the table, then at Barty's bandaged, mangled hand. At the sound of his name, Barty fell to his knees and prostrated himself. "I had thought everything broken," Voldemort said softly. "Then I discovered, beyond the broken, there is true completeness." He reached out and patted Barty's rumpled hair, as if reassuring a favored pet. "Master?" Barty asked, bewildered. "Hush," Voldemort commanded, with a lifted finger. "Very interesting, but I imagine my dear professor is still in the dark." He let out a sound like an owl's hoot, a laugh, but laced with something like recollection. Like Dumbledore, Voldemort had been a student of arcane things. Decades of wandering had shown him relics and artifacts, arcana from Egyptian tombs, Mesopotamian ruins, tucked away alchemical oddities. He had seen everything from curious peering glasses and enchanted quills to time-turners, the Founder's relics, and flickers of legends like the Philosopher's Stone. Yet none of it ever quite satisfied the sense of completion he craved. Until, 3 years before, he glimpsed something in Hogwarts corridors. Attached to Quirrell, a timid first-year Slytherin had pulled a small die from his pocket. Voldemort at first dismissed it as a child's trinket, but when the boy held that die, Voldemort felt something wholly different: completeness. A fully realized alchemical object, unheard of. Even the most trivial item, if truly complete, implied complete magic and immutable rules underpinning it. Regret flared in his red eyes. Had he not been preoccupied with the Philosopher's Stone, had escape from Hogwarts been easier then, he might have seized that chance. Circumstance had denied him. Now the Daily Prophet fed him others' news. The once timid student had grown extraordinary. Strange images returned to him, visions like film, a blue fiendfire-like phoenix, a normal orange-red phoenix, a 20-foot whale Patronus capable of carrying a wizard. The Triwizard Tournament, the figure beneath the ice and snow. Each report hinted at forces and possibilities Voldemort wanted to understand and, if possible, to control. He watched Barty quietly. He trusted the man, but he did not trust him with everything. The fewer who knew a true plan, the more safely it could mislead the wise professor in the castle and steer him into error. "Harry Potter," he said, letting the name lie in the room like an accusation. At the name, hatred showed on Barty's face. Voldemort noticed and allowed a thin, sinister smile. "My child, you may return. Continue your contact with that student. Keep him within reach. Make him lean our way. Our advantage may be revealed when the moment comes." Chapter 349, Camellia is Blooming. It was mid-December. An ordinary weekend brought a fine drizzle laced with the occasional snowflake. Perhaps it was too early in the season, or perhaps the rain spoiled it, but the snow never settled. Flakes melted away before they touched the ground. Though Christmas was approaching, the gloom and damp made the young wizards in the castle slip into near hibernation. Everything felt quiet and desolate. Warm common rooms and crackling fires kept everyone snug. No one wanted to leave unless absolutely necessary. That, however, only applied to the castle's student population. Outside the main building, in a disused greenhouse that had been repurposed, a different scene was unfolding. "Teamy, Nilu, print this photo and mark it with that special font," Draco said from behind a large desk, his voice brisk. The former abandoned room had been made sumptuous. No fewer than a dozen enchanted lamps lined the walls, casting a warm orange glow that felt all the cozier against the pale winter light. "Got it, boss," came a high, practiced voice. A small humanoid figure, barely a foot tall, darted out from a cubicle, snatched a photograph from the desk, and scurried back to its station, closing the door behind it. Draco glanced at a badge lying on the table beside him. "Associate Editor, Special Correspondent. Colin, I'm adding another 5 galleons to your expenses. Bring me something juicy. Scarheads, no, Potter's story is old news." Colin looked up when his name was called, blinking and then giving a helpless little shrug. "What can I do if it's old? There's nothing new. If I stretch it, the only lead left is that Miss Delacour might be, well, scandalous." He sounded a little pressured. Lately, the castle felt like standing water, unnaturally calm after the upheaval of 2 weeks ago. Colin's thoughts wandered back to that sudden shift. Harry exonerated. The truth about the killing curse finally revealed. The Daily Prophet had published that an unknown dark wizard first attacked Director Crouch and forced him to cast the curse on Harry. The story sounded clumsy, but no one questioned it. The fallout had been real. Barty Crouch, Director of International Magical Cooperation, had been gravely injured and had resigned. Departments in the ministry were powerful. To remove a director was a major shakeup. The idea that it was done just to protect Harry sounded absurd to most, yet no one had properly investigated Barty's condition or the circumstances that led to his resignation. "I'm sorry, no one verified Barty's story," Colin muttered, remembering the piece he had written, The Mask of Hypocrisy, which had circulated widely among the students but been studiously ignored by the ministry. Draco heard the sigh and only chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't worry about it. No one's going to make things hard for Barty now, especially since he resigned." He enjoyed Colin's confusion, but knew the uncertainty extended beyond the reporter. Even his father, Lucius, seemed unsure. The ministry had gone oddly quiet. Draco had received a single terse letter from home in recent days. Stay close to Eno and cultivate that relationship. It was clearly written out of caution and self-interest, and he resented the implication that friendship should be a lever for advantage. He had left the letter unfolded on his dormitory desk, an open irritation. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in!" The door opened on a girl with golden twin ponytails who bounced into the room. Draco recognized her instantly. Hannah Abbott, a frequent supplier of local gossip and the informal lifeblood of their little press. "I'm here to sell news," she announced brightly, dropping onto the visitor sofa and swinging one leg over the other like an eager schoolgirl. "You're always welcome, Miss Abbott," Draco said, rising. She truly was one of the mainstays of their magazine. Hannah launched into her list in a steady, practiced voice as an automatic quill beside her transcribed every word. This morning at 9:30, someone saw Eno and Granger together at the astronomy tower. At 11, Ravenclaw's seventh-year prefect Gugion delivered a love letter to Delacour, only it got swapped. And "Achoo!" came a sudden sneeze from across the grounds. In the tranquil little sanctuary near the greenhouses, Eno rubbed at his nose and glared skyward. Of course people were talking. There was nothing to be done about gossip. People would whisper about anyone. Unless one took to cursing names in the manner of the darkest of wizards, even someone like Dumbledore would be talked about behind his back. He reminded himself of why he'd come out here. Under a 10-foot oak, he'd been sorting through a heap of gemstones. With Christmas almost upon them, and at the insistence of George and Fred's earlier teasing, he planned to fashion a pair of straw rings set with moonstones. Handmade gifts required a proper ritual, after all. He had once received a basket of straw rings himself, and had never expected to be the one to give one away someday, making these felt oddly like destiny. He sat cross-legged on the ground, the gemstones flashing in the weak light. After a few minutes' consideration, he selected 2 moonstones that glowed with a soft, pearly light. Moonstone, also called the Lover's Stone, was perfect, gentle, pure, and when caught in the right light, it gave off a warm, moonlit sheen. Satisfied with his choice, Eno rose and walked toward the ice-slick path that curved away from the valley. If everything went as he hoped, a new story would begin here around Christmas. Red maples heavy with their own whispered tales, creeping vines like threads between trunks, and, most captivating of all, the azure ice flower. It was a short branch, only 2 feet long, bearing a single blossom the size of a teacup, deep blue stamen, sea blue petals layered and precise, fresh and elegant. "Camellia," he breathed. By its unique shape, he recognized the ice-blooming flower at a glance. Chapter 350, A Different Christmas. A holiday that should have little to do with wizards had, for reasons no one could quite explain, become the most eagerly anticipated time of year at Hogwarts. In the week before the holiday, the castle grew livelier by the day. Everyone was excited, because this year's Christmas feast promised to be unusual. Rumor had it that Dumbledore had ordered 500 barrels of mead from the 3 broomsticks, and there were whispers that the Weird Sisters would perform with Eno that night. More than any of those whispers, though, what thrilled the students was the legendary Christmas ball. It was nothing new. Youngsters in their early teens always longed for a taste of adult life, but the ball promised exactly that. In tradition, of course, only independent adults attended such events, and that promise alone sent hearts racing. Breakfast had ended. At the Gryffindor table, Ron announced triumphantly to Harry that he'd found a partner and had even bought a decent suit. "Mate, listen to me. You better hurry, or all the good girls will be taken," he said, clapping Harry on the shoulder like an old hand at affairs of the heart. Harry kept eating, but his eyes drifted to the girls at the next table. "Ginny?" he said, and when Ginny realized she was being watched, she turned and answered his look with a gentle smile. Ron, who stood nearby, felt a complicated twist of pride, annoyance, and the hollow sting of seeing something he'd hoped for taken from him. All right, he said, resigned. "Anyway, she's liked you since she was little." Across the hall, Slytherin students were talking about the ball too, though with far more reserve than Gryffindor's noisy excitement. Daphne asked Pansy, in a tone that made her reluctance clear, "What do you think about the ball? About that, Granger? If you like him, go after him." Pansy replied coolly, "You needn't worry about me." Daphne bristled at the remark and sniffed, "Humph, I'm doing this for your own good and you're not even grateful. This is your chance, if you—" She left the rest unspoken, perhaps sparing her friend's feelings. Pansy gave the faintest smile. "Then thank you for your kindness. But I did say once that too many people break up after graduation." "There you go again," Daphne interrupted. "Yes, many do break up after graduation, but many also have children after graduation. Forget it. I'm done with you." She stomped out of the great hall in a huff. Pansy remained seated, expression unreadable, her gaze drifting as if lost in thought. In the Slytherin dormitory, Eno sat at his desk. The small table before him was cluttered with delicate tools, chisels, files, fragments of gemstones, and ink bottles filled with mysterious liquids. He was working on an alchemical piece called the Straw Ring. Though he had a good grasp of alchemy, this was only the second alchemical item he'd attempted. He thought, with a small smile, of a staff he'd once fashioned that looked like a walking stick. A foolish little attempt to be like Gandalf, he admitted. It had never seen the adventures of Middle-earth, and calling it a regret would be too strong, but he was determined not to repeat half measures. He wanted the ring before him to embody everything he'd learned. He picked up a file and hummed to himself as he carefully polished a moonstone the size of an egg. 2 days passed like water. As Hogwarts prepared to host the Triwizard Tournament, the castle seemed intent on impressing guests from the other schools. Though Christmas was still days away, the decorations were already going up. The moving staircase handrails were draped in enchanted icicles. The great hall ceiling had been transformed into a deep purple, star-strewn sky. Now and then points of light drifted down like falling stars, exquisite and tiny. Suits of armor had been enchanted by Professor Flitwick to hum cheerful carols when anyone passed. Not every suit behaved properly. One even muttered curses once. But only the Hogwarts students knew that Peeves was responsible. When McGonagall learned that a spirit was insulting the castle's dignity, she was uncommonly furious. Since then, Filch had been seen more and more, a nervous figure with a sharpened mop handle, tapping each armor and muttering complaints as he went. On the 8th floor, Filch had had enough. "Peeves, come out now! Don't make me poke you with this stick," he barked, tugging at a suit of armor and threatening the mop handle in his hands. "Oh, incompetent Filch, dreaming of harming Sir Peeves? Preposterous!" Peeves taunted. His words passed through the armor, and his body slipped into the wall. Filch, thinking he'd finally shaken him off, relaxed for a moment. Then Peeves reappeared in midair in the corridor, brandishing 2 uncapped bottles of ink. Filch closed his eyes in despair, gripping the mop as if it were his last defense. Then a calm voice said from behind him, "Peeves, leave." "Boring, boring, boring." Peeves squealed, and unusually, he slipped back through the wall and away. Filch opened his eyes to find who had helped him and was stunned. He recognized the student. There had been trouble between them 4 years ago when the student had scattered snow in the corridor, and he hadn't expected assistance now. After a moment, he managed a whisper, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Eno said, his tone indifferent. He had been on his way to deliver the straw ring to Hermione and had stopped only to deal with the mess. He didn't linger after speaking. He passed Filch and walked on toward the fat lady's portrait. "It's late in the month. Shouty asks for votes. Please vote. Please vote. Thank you for your support." Chapter 351, Gifts Given Out. The corridor on the 8th floor of the castle was quiet. "I've heard your songs. They say your singing is full of feeling. I used to be able to do that, but now I'm only a portrait." The fat lady, guardian of the Gryffindor common room, looked wistful. "Don't worry so much about it. Emotion comes from memory. If you can remember something that moved you, then sing. Let the feeling come through the words." Eno listened to the portrait with the casual curiosity of a tourist ticking off a landmark. He had been at Hogwarts for almost 4 years, and there were still places he hadn't seen. The fat lady's portrait, the kitchens, Ravenclaw's bronze knocker. At first year caution and later simply familiarity had kept him from exploring. Living somewhere long enough made everything lose its novelty. Outside the Gryffindor common room, he and the fat lady chatted for a few minutes when the portrait swung open from behind with a soft rustle. "Eno," Hermione stepped out, pleasantly surprised. "Why didn't you tell me using the two-way mirror? I could have come to find you. I remember you don't like climbing stairs." "It's nothing," Eno said, his tone carrying a double meaning as he looked at her. "Besides, I can't always let you be the one to make the first move." Hermione, wearing a simple robe but with subtle hints of makeup, a touch of pink gloss and slightly elongated eyeliner, blushed faintly. The gloss had been applied in a hurry. A little extra color had caught the corner of her mouth, but she wasn't paying attention to that. Her mind went elsewhere, tracing the years that had led to this small, charged moment. From the summer before leaving elementary school until now, Hermione could trace every step of their relationship. They were in different houses and saw each other infrequently. but every meeting had been warm. She remembered, more clearly than she expected, her early isolation 2 months into her first year, when many students kept away and she'd felt abandoned. Back then, she only wanted to go home, to her parents in London. Then, in a corridor outside the library, she'd met Eno again. He'd offered gentle encouragement and a small warmth in the vast, cold castle. Perhaps that was when the seed was planted. Later friends and changes could not undo it. Slowly, a small smile curved her lips. What had been planted so long ago had finally sprouted. Eno, are you daydreaming again? Didn't you stop that habit after third year? A teasing voice brought her back. She looked up, annoyed but smiling, at Eno's grin. I don't daydream. Never did. Never will, she protested, stamping her foot with mock severity. Noticing a few curious faces peeking from around the corridor corner, Hermione suggested, Let's go. We should head up to the astronomy tower, or we'll just be ogled here. Okay, Eno nodded. He had seen the hidden heads too, but he hadn't planned to be secretive. The whole point of this outing was to be seen a little, thanks in part to a roommate who was editor-in-chief of the school magazine and very good at stirring rumors. Drawing attention now would keep busybodies talking, and more importantly, keep Hermione from being gossiped about. They walked along the long corridor side by side. At a turn, snow began to fall again, thick and soft. Late December in the Scottish Highlands, the sky always seemed determined to be white. We don't have to go to the astronomy tower, Eno said, watching the flakes. Ice skating on the Black Lake could be lovely. Hermione smiled and nodded. The destination didn't matter to her. Outside, the falling snow turned the castle grounds into a winter scene. The Black Lake's once dark surface had hardened into ice, dusted with fresh snow. At the small boat dock, dozens of skiffs lay lined up. Shall we row a boat? Eno asked. They chose one and set off. The boat moved smoothly, guided by a little magic, breaking the stillness of the frozen lake with delicate ripples. In under half an hour, they reached the center, and the castle across the lake, veiled in swirling snow, looked like an elaborate oil painting of turrets and spires. A soft sneeze broke the quiet. Achoo! Sorry, Hermione murmured, rubbing her nose. Eno realized at once that his inherited ice magic had long since numbed him to the cold, but Hermione wasn't the same. Rowing on a snowy day was bound to chill anyone. It's fine. Hold on. Hermione flicked her wand. Impervious. A white shimmer flashed from the tip of her wand. Snowflakes encountered an invisible barrier and swirled harmlessly around the boat, leaving them in a small, clear pocket as the world fell white beyond. Actually, Eno said as he watched the flakes part, I think you need this more. He reached into his pocket and produced a small gift, a 4-inch square box wrapped in blue velvet. An early Christmas present? Hermione took the box, stroking the soft fabric. Something like that. It's special. Eno smiled, keeping the mystery. Hermione's curiosity flared. Over the past few years, he had surprised her at Christmas every time. The miniature castle crystal globe in their first year, a self-writing quill the second, an exquisite moving picture mirror the third. She couldn't wait. She opened the box eagerly. Chapter 352, Black Lake in Winter. Oh my. Hermione covered her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her. Nestled in the 4-inch gift box was a set of jewelry that seemed to glow with a pale moonlight. The first thing she noticed was a beautiful necklace, its chain woven from fine silver threads, a smooth teardrop moonstone pendant suspended beneath. Even in daylight, the moonstone shimmered with a mysterious inner light, subtle like a dream of moonlit nights, elegant and romantic. Beside the necklace lay a pair of rings made of the same moonstone. Compared to the necklace, the rings were simply crafted, polished stones embossed with a straw-like pattern. Yet it was those simple rings that held Hermione's gaze. She barely registered the necklace at first. After a moment, she murmured, "Straw rings." Then she quickly lifted her head and put on an air of indifference. I gave you one like that, you know. You never wore it. I suppose you got so many that mine was probably tossed away somewhere. Although her tone tried for casualness, the slight flush in her eyes and the curve of her smile betrayed her feelings. I didn't throw away the straw rings, Eno said with a sigh. Whatever else, those were someone's heartfelt gift. But they're mass-produced. What I gave you is unique. For example? Hermione asked, eyebrows arched with curiosity. Before I answer, put on the necklace first. Eno didn't answer at once. He pointed to the necklace in the box. Don't underestimate it. When I made this, I used pretty much everything I know about alchemy. You made all of it yourself? Hermione's face changed from amused to bright delight. Yes, I made them all, even the raw materials. Hearing that, Hermione picked up the necklace and slipped it over her neck without another word. The silver chain settled against her fair skin. When the clasp closed, a gentle warmth spread through her. Even out here on the Black Lake in winter, with snow drifting down, she felt no chill. What did you do? She asked, puzzled. Alchemy techniques, Eno began, listing them like family heirlooms. It protects against cold and heat, and I added a number of other effects. He had engraved several ancient runes into the moonstone and woven a triggered charm into the piece, the shield charm, following Nicholas's notes. A moment later, Hermione said bluntly, I prefer the straw rings. Practical though the necklace was, she made her preference clear. Eno smiled and spread his hands. Fine, as long as you like it. He glanced at the larger ring still in the box. I gave you your Christmas present early. Don't you think you should give me something in return? Hermione looked down at the ring, pursed her lips for a beat, then smiled sweetly. I'll give it to you now, Mr. Swinburne. Time slipped by unnoticed. Outside the castle, on the wide, silent Black Lake, a small boat drifted with no breeze to move it. Snow fell harder and heavier. Hermione leaned against the wooden beam at the bow, where an oil lamp swung gently. Casual and comfortable, she kept glancing at her right hand, where a moonstone ring shone on her slender finger. Eno wore the identical ring on his hand. Thinking it would be amusing, Hermione reached out. When the two rings came close, light specks like falling snowflakes danced around them, cold, star-like motes like light from the night sky. Hermione seemed in a playful mood, and each time the halo of light appeared, she would jerk away abruptly, making the glow blink on and off. It wasn't the most entertaining game, but she laughed softly and went on. Eno watched, smiling. The sight reminded him of himself long ago, happily wasting hours on a little fire-making spell under a bridge. Eventually, the playful interlude ended. Hermione smoothed her hair and said more seriously, Felix Felicis is still 3 months away. I wonder if it'll be ready in time for the second task. Felix Felicis? Eno was startled for a moment, then remembered what she meant, the potion she'd been brewing in the room of requirement. Speaking of potions, Professor Snape's been on edge lately. Is he still tutoring you? Eno commented casually. The events of the first task had rattled everyone. Snape, though Harry had been cleared, had been even more intense than usual. Outside of his regular potions classes, he'd been almost sequestered. Professor Snape? Hermione shook her head. He stopped tutoring me after term started. He said since I could brew Felix Felicis on my own, there was nothing more he could teach me. Meanwhile, in a dim, secret room that had once held Peter Pettigrew prisoner, Snape sat hunched over a table. The space was small, no more than 10 square meters, and guarded by secrecy as tight as any lock. A single candle burned, casting flickering light across shelves filled with half-processed ingredients. Opposite those shelves stood a little round stone table about 2 feet across, a cauldron bubbling on it. Behind that, a wide wooden table ran the length of the room. Snape sat there, frowning, poring over a thick, ancient volume. Beside the open tome was another book, its cover black and its aura gloomy. In vivid red script along its spine, someone had written, Secrets of the Dark Arts Revealed. There's also this chapter, probably around 9 o'clock. Because time is really running out, Xiao can only delay a little. Sorry, everyone. The Chamber of Secrets was dimly lit. Snape sat at the table in silence. He trusted potions more than he trusted human hearts. It was the same instinct that had governed him 15 years ago. Everything that had happened in Godric's Hollow felt absurdly orchestrated, as if each moment had been planned down to the smallest detail. Since then, he trusted no one. He had just received word that Harry's condition was stable, but the sudden appearance of the killing curse on the Quidditch pitch felt like a private taunt. Stable? A student not yet in his 5th year had felled a dragon with a single blow. Whether his magic was sufficient or not was one thing. The raw killing intent alone was something no ordinary adult wizard possessed, and all of it rested on the premise that the person had already been resurrected. In that light, stable seemed a bitter joke. Horcrux, he whispered. A soft sigh echoed through the dark room. After a long silence, he opened a drawer at his right and took out a small photo album. The gold-lettered cover read, "Friendship Forever, Lily Evans." His hand trembled slightly as he traced the inscription. He turned the flyleaf. The picture inside showed a very pretty girl with long dark red hair and almond-shaped green eyes. She seemed aware of being watched and smiled, a bloom of warmth, waving as if toward someone she loved. Time slipped by in the quiet. When he finally closed the album, he wiped tears from the corners of his eyes with a finger. Then, as if making up his mind, his gaze fell on the closed book beside him, Secrets of the Dark Arts. Snape had read about Horcruxes. He could grasp them from books, but that theoretical knowledge wasn't enough for a potions master. To craft targeted potions, one needed intuitive experience, otherwise it was just empty talk. The only answer he could see before him was grim and singular: make a Horcrux. He pulled back his sleeve. The faint trace of a dark mark, the Maledictus, was still barely visible. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, that time might be short. The one who had returned had chosen to lie low, and Dumbledore, too, seemed to be maneuvering. The two images kept switching in his mind until, with a small, decisive movement, he rose and took a tiny bottle of golden, sparkling potion from the ingredient shelf. He uncorked it and drank exactly one spoonful. As Felix Felicis slid down his throat, Snape sat back down. The familiar images that had haunted him receded, and in their place, a clear vision formed. A dawn on the Thames, a black-haired boy sitting beneath the arch of a bridge, quietly eating cheap fried fish alone. Time flowed on. By December 24th, it was normally the start of the Hogwarts Christmas holiday, when students took the train to be with their families for Christmas Eve. This year, however, no one chose to leave. The train stood at Hogsmeade Station and did not depart. Snow had been falling since early morning. In a world of white, the Beauxbatons carriage, broad and house-like, looked like a frost-covered giant pumpkin. Hagrid's and Moody's small huts nearby resembled sugared slices of pumpkin pie. The great hall was full that morning. Even for breakfast, the house elves had prepared special delicacies. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione frowned at the black pudding and haggis in front of her. "School food is a bit heavy. I'm worried my dress won't fit," she said. "You ordered a custom dress? You didn't tell me." Ginny turned, mock hurt. "I didn't order one," Hermione replied quickly. "I wrote home and asked Mum to buy it at the mall. It's not custom made. I don't have enough galleons, only pounds." Hermione's voice dropped. If she could, she would have had a proper magical evening gown from Madame Malkin's, but she simply couldn't afford it. Ginny's teasing face softened the moment she heard Hermione had no galleons. "Why didn't you tell me? I'll trade with you. And if people find out that the girlfriend of the Film Mirror founder has no galleons for a dress, it'll be the joke of the year." "I don't want to spend his money," Hermione answered at once. Ginny nudged her and eyed the moonstone ring on Hermione's finger. When Hermione had first shown up with the ring a few days earlier, it had caused a small stir in Gryffindor. The girls in the common room had been all acidity and sarcasm at once. "I have confidence," Hermione protested, voice a little louder than she intended, and a few heads turned. Ginny softened and soothed her like one calming a startled pygmy puff. All right, I know. Tell me about the malls," Ginny said, curious. "Are they like Diagon Alley?" Hermione explained the variety. Some malls were specialist stores, others were like Diagon Alley with all sorts of goods, and then promised, "If you have time this summer, I'll write and take you shopping." "Deal," Ginny said, bright as ever. The conversation drifted to dresses, cosmetics, and the many little things girls liked. Down in the Slytherin dormitory, peace was in short supply as well. Eno woke to find his room buried under gifts. He called Blue Lantern to help unwrap and sort them. Draco, now a magazine editor, was too busy to be counted on. As Blue Lantern unpacked a box of chocolates, one that smelled strongly of amortentia, he paused. "Master, I think this requires your personal inspection," Blue Lantern said, holding a package wrapped in ordinary khaki craft paper, the shape of a book. Eno frowned. Blue Lantern had not asked for a personal inspection even of the chocolate, which carried a heady scent. He took the package. The paper seemed plain enough, but a faint, elusive gloom clung to it. As the negative feelings surfaced, a black mist swelled, and a boggart, which had been skulking in the shadows, lunged at the emotion. It devoured the stray feeling and then melted back into the shadow beneath Eno's feet. Chapter 354, Snape's Entrustment, The Mysterious Number 7. The dormitory was strewn with gifts. As the boggart sank back into the shadows, Eno's frown eased. The package, despite his first fears, did not carry a dark arts curse. Only the faintest trace of dark magic clung to it. Relieved, he tore the wrappings away. Beneath the last sheet of parchment lay a black-bound book, Secrets of the Darkest Arts. Interesting, he murmured. The book alone was an unusual Christmas present, far more significant than a love potion or other trivial trinkets. Before he could wonder who would dare give something like this, a magically sealed envelope materialized on the book's cover. A dense tome on the dark arts, with a letter hidden behind concealment charms. That combination immediately ruled out most wizards. Among people he knew, only two could pull off something like this easily, Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel, yet their personalities made them unlikely suspects. Eno didn't bother guessing. He picked up the envelope and felt its weight. Thick, the kind that suggested at least 5 pages. A quarter of an hour later, he set the final sheet down. The lightness that had been on his face was gone, replaced by a look of concentrated caution. He whispered under his breath. He actually gave up on Harry and went after Barty Crouch Sr. instead. The letter was from Snape. It was long, but every line mattered. It said that Lord Voldemort had returned, but not in the way the old story went. He had not chosen Harry's blood in his resurrection. After coming back, he did not rally the Death Eaters or break out of Azkaban. Instead, he had done something uncharacteristic. He lay low. That single detail contrasted sharply with the familiar narrative, and it left Eno unsettled. He tried to reconstruct Voldemort's course. The brilliance of his youth, the ambition of early adulthood, the transformation after years away from Hogwarts, the madness before his supposed death, and the strange neurotic calm after resurrection. The pattern pulled Eno into the role of detective, trying to deduce how the man who had once manipulated Dumbledore within the rules could become the ruined figure the record showed. Was it only corrosion by the dark arts? Or had Tom Riddle encountered something during his travels that fundamentally changed him? In the quiet of the dormitory, he let his thoughts roam. He considered Dumbledore, how the headmaster had always drawn lines he would not cross. That reluctance had been known for decades. Voldemort had exploited it long ago. Myrtle's death was an example. The solution could have been forced with legitimacy, but the old headmaster refused to violate that boundary. He would rather see Hagrid's wand broken than break his own moral limits. Whether that restraint was right or wrong was impossible to judge. To Muggles, it might look like stubbornness. To wizards, opening someone's mind could have unpredictable, terrible consequences. If Dumbledore had pried into certain minds back then, he might not be Dumbledore anymore. Still, Eno returned to Voldemort. If Riddle had once bent Dumbledore to his will within the rules of their world, why would he later be cornered into madness? Eno pictured the great scientists of the Muggle world, and suddenly, a portrait floated into his mind, Isaac Newton. Newton had been a towering genius in mathematics, physics, astronomy, and natural philosophy, yet in later life he became strange, even obsessive. The usual explanations, overwork, mercury poisoning, grief, didn't convince Eno. He suspected something else, that upon reaching the summit of knowledge, Newton uncovered a truth that overturned everything he'd done before. Imagine a lifetime of work toppled by a revelation. The shock could shatter anyone's sanity. That image nudged him toward Voldemort again. The parallels were there: extraordinary talent, a brilliant mind, and then a collapse into something darker. What then had Tom pursued? Power? Pure-blood dominance? Glory? Those words flitted through Eno's head and fell away until one thought remained. Horcruxes, immortality. He slapped his forehead. Of course, how had he missed something so obvious? Horcruxes were Voldemort's obsession. If immortality was the goal, Eno thought of another immortal he'd met, Nicholas Flamel. When they'd met in France, Flamel had told him he was 665 years old. He and his wife were ancient by human standards, and they seemed resigned to the fact they wouldn't reach 700. Voldemort, by contrast, had created 7 Horcruxes. One man had chased eternal life via the Philosopher's Stone, the other by splitting his soul, and neither had broken beyond the number 7. That coincidence struck Eno. Flamel had lived centuries but accepted his mortality. Voldemort had made 7 Horcruxes and still failed to transcend death. Perhaps the realization that true immortality was unattainable was what twisted Tom into becoming Lord Voldemort. The blow of that failure could explain the descent into cruelty and terror. And yet, in the letter, Snape described something else. After resurrection, Voldemort had not thrown himself into frenzy. He had not become the single-minded, vengeful monster the original story recorded. He had, inexplicably, been cautious, even rational. Eno frowned. If the impossibility of immortality had broken him, a resurrected Voldemort should have been all fury and slaughter, blind to everything but revenge. He toyed with another idea, then shook his head, partly amused at his own fancifulness. The number 7 had always been a mysterious, almost sacral figure in the magical world. Maybe it hinted at some rule neither Philosopher's Stone nor Horcruxes could break. Perhaps even a wizard as remarkable as Voldemort could not transcend certain limits. After all, history had produced too many astonishing minds for any single person to outdo them all. Rowena Ravenclaw alone could be an impenetrable iceberg of legacy and rules. Eno rubbed his temples. Even resurrected, Voldemort ought to have raged. Instead, he had chosen a different path, and that choice, small and strange, might mean everything. Chapter 355, Fantastic Christmas Dinner. The dormitory was quiet. Blue Lantern was still diligently unwrapping gifts. The soft rustle of torn paper was the only sound. Eno no longer had the heart to finish his own. He had just worked out Lord Voldemort's logic and reluctantly could understand Snape's dilemma. Snape was no fool. If anything, he was brilliant. A man who had stood by Voldemort's side for over a decade and kept his wits would inevitably notice the differences. Snape's letter, though framed as an explanation of the present situation, read like a plea, an entrustment. At the end, he had even handed over the key to his Gringotts vault, the life savings of a potion master. It might not be everything, but it was considerable. Time slid by in silence. Troubled, Eno stayed in the dormitory most of the day. At noon, he had Blue Lantern prepare a simple meal, then spent the rest of the afternoon lost in thought. If he could help Snape in any way, he wanted to. Repaying the debt felt right. By evening, the sky had darkened. Around 6 o'clock, Eno stood at the wardrobe where the Ministry had stored robes for the upcoming Quidditch concert. He had only worn one of them originally. The rest had been given to him by Bagman as a favor, custom-made, Bagman had insisted. Choosing slowly, Eno selected a robe of silver-gray silk with light purple vine embroidery at the cuffs and hem. Dressed, he opened the dormitory door. Tonight, Hogwarts glittered like no other night. Young witches and wizards were not in their usual black. The castle was full of colorful evening gowns and suits, evoking a medieval royal banquet. In the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat on a sofa, bored and waiting for his dance partner. Ron and Neville had already left. "Sorry, Harry. Did I keep you waiting?" a voice called from the stairwell. Ginny appeared, and Harry turned quickly. He had not expected her to look so different. A figure-hugging purple gown accentuated her silhouette. Her long red curls framed her face and brought out the youthful charm of a young woman. Ginny, you look beautiful," he stammered, ridiculous and sincere. Ginny giggled and elbowed him. "All right, let's go." The champions opened the dance. At 7, the great oak doors of the great hall swung open, and the familiar scene was transformed. The enchanted ceiling glowed purple and scattered with starlight. Tiny fairies, no bigger than 1 to 5 inches, fluttered through the air like something from a fairy tale, their colorful wings tracing soft rainbows across the hall. The walls, too, had been charmed. Where there had once been plain stone, now stood rows of 3-foot Christmas trees, each topped with a warm orange 5-pointed star. Several hundred of them lit the hall in place of the usual candelabras. They weren't just decorations. Each tree was hung with honeyduke's sweets, and a young witch or wizard could tap the wall with a wand to send a candy tumbling free. Harry gaped at the dreamlike scene, but then he noticed a quiet behind him. Years of training with Moody made him spin around and shield Ginny reflexively. He relaxed when he saw who was approaching. Hermione, arm in arm with Eno. Hermione moved with calm grace, every step poised. She wore 3-inch black heels that showed in the gentle sway of her skirt. Her dress was a fitted, light blue evening gown, simpler than some of the vintage styles, the slits and open back toned down, but elegant all the same. A pigeon egg-sized moonstone hung at her throat, glowing soft white against the blue. The whole image made her look as if she had stepped out of a painting of Artemis. Hermione was beautiful, but she did not command every eye. Much of the crowd had turned to look at her companion. Eno, usually seen in black robes and given to reclusiveness, had surprised everyone tonight. He stood beneath the starlit ceiling in a silver-gray satin robe that caught the light. His amber eyes and gentle smile left several girls breathless. Cameras and enchanted mirrors were quickly produced. At 8, Professor McGonagall entered with the other 2 heads of house. Dumbledore was not in sight, but his absence drew little interest. Everyone's attention was on the ball. "Champions and your partners, please come this way," McGonagall called. The 4 champions walked onto the raised stage. There was a moment of awkwardness. Fleur Delacour had arrived in a silver-gray gown too, and the 2 robes clashed. Eno felt the pressure of the moment and smiled. With a small, almost private motion, he touched his cuff. The silver-gray fabric shimmered and shifted into sea blue, echoing Hermione's dress. Hermione's lips curved, a flash of triumph passed across her face. As the champions took their places, Professor Flitwick mounted a stool and waved his wand. Enchanted instruments arranged before him sprang to life like an orchestra at a conductor's cue, and a clear, lilting waltz began. Eno took Hermione's hand. As their moonstone rings met, a pale, moon-like halo formed 2 feet above them, and a sprinkling of sparkling light drifted down like snow. Close enough that she could hear him, Eno leaned toward Hermione and whispered, "This dance is called First Encounter, the Weird Sisters' famous song." The Christmas banquet ran on until midnight. Dancing was hard on the body, but the younger students at the castle seemed to have boundless energy. Even after hours of dancing, many of them lingered when the music stopped. For some, especially the 7th years about to graduate, tonight might become an unforgettable memory. As midnight approached, the lower years reluctantly headed back to their dormitories. Only the graduating 7th years remained, as if making a last farewell to their school days. In the end, the Christmas feast was a success. December 25th dawned, and the 10-day holiday began. The professors were merciful with assignments, but 1st and 2nd years were nevertheless sour. 3rd years and above could visit Hogsmeade by day, while 1st and 2nd years were confined to the castle. Confined was, of course, a relative term. Some houses were more obedient than others, but Professor McGonagall had prepared for the mischief. Filch stood at the castle entrance with his usual sour expression, scrutinizing every student who passed. Mad-Eye Moody, acting as the new gamekeeper, was stationed in Hogsmeade with his magical eye, ready to catch anyone who slipped past Filch. None of those precautions mattered to Eno. At 9 that morning, after washing up, he and Hermione returned to the Hogsmeade cottage. With Blue Lantern's help, they had a hearty breakfast, and then Hermione, taking charge of the little house, began decorating the 2nd-floor rooms. By noon, Eno sat in the downstairs living room, the fire crackling. With an extra person in the cottage, the place felt warmer. Hermione had already dashed out 4 times in 3 hours, each time returning with a large bag of supplies. Eno half reclined on the sofa, listening to the comforting rasp of the flames, and let his eyes drift closed. The grandfather clock in the room chimed 12 times. "Noon," he muttered as he opened his eyes, but stayed seated. "Blue Lantern, lunch, keep it light, breakfast was too rich." A reply never came. Blue Lantern did not appear. The change made Eno sit up, then a rhythmic knock at the door. He rose and opened it. The figure on the threshold stopped him cold. Black robes, a flat nose, a bald head, and crimson eyes, Lord Voldemort stood there. Ridiculously, he carried a bag of gifts and looked as if he were simply dropping by for Christmas. "Good day," Voldemort drawled with sickening politeness. "Forgive my unannounced visit, but I believe we have met before." Eno's hand went to summon the Phoenix, but neither Corvus nor Fide appeared. Voldemort seemed to sense something. He placed a hand over his chest, gave a slight bow, and added, "I apologize for any imposition. I came with sincerity. It would be a pity if I were refused an audience with the owner of the house." As he spoke, the clear Hogsmeade sky suddenly filled with falling snow. A bitter wind rose, and the shadow at Eno's feet twisted and lengthened. A thin black mist began to creep up. "Eno, is someone at the door?" Hermione's clear voice called from the second floor. In an instant, the snowfall slackened and the black mist evaporated. "No, stay upstairs. It's best to nap at noon," Eno said calmly, and the stairway door to the second floor sealed over with frost. Voldemort watched silence. Only when the frost had fully formed did he speak again. "Would you care to invite me in? I brought your favorite cream toffee." Eno lowered himself onto the sofa and forced a weary sigh. "Very well. Please come in, Senior." He moved aside. He had little choice. Voldemort's knowing mention of the cream toffee proved he had done his research. He'd set wards to stop apparition, and even the Phoenix had been curbed. Hermione upstairs, and even Dumbledore, who'd left the night before, were all accounted for in whatever Voldemort had planned. Voldemort stepped inside with an elegant "thank you" and placed a Honeyduke's paper bag on the tea table. "Although you may not eat them, I must praise Mr. Flume's skill. Those flavors haven't changed," he said with a hint of nostalgia. "Do sit. This is unexpected," Eno said, keeping his tone light. Beneath the easy small talk, he was buying time for Hermione. Upstairs, Hermione had initially ignored the noise from below and continued arranging decorations. Then she noticed a line of words Frost had left on the inside of the doorframe. "Go out the window. Escape. Light the feather, and let Corvus send you back to the castle." Without hesitation, she drew her wand and moved toward the window. The cottage's Victorian design made the second floor only 3 odd meters above the ground, but to avoid any sound, she quietly transfigured a rope into a soft ladder. She fastened it, hitching up her robes, and swung a leg out. In the living room, Eno watched the ladder drop past the opposite window. The knotted rope brushed the glass with a small sound, insignificant to most ears, but not to the visitor in front of him. Voldemort's voice floated in, amused. "You could have let her take the stairs. I'm merely visiting. Truly, I bear no ill will." Eno didn't reply. He kept his gaze steady until Hermione's silhouette slipped from view below. Then he allowed himself a quiet breath. "Then I thank you for your goodwill," he said. "Now, perhaps you might tell me the purpose of your visit." Xiaodi's note, Honeyduke's Sweet Shop. Mr. Flume's name here is from the original story, not my invention. Honeyduke sells chocolates and many other magical sweets in Hogsmeade and is a favorite of Hogwarts students and teachers. The shop is run by Ambrosius Flume. When he goes to the cellar to restock, his wife minds the shop above. At Christmas, the place is packed. The cellar is lined with crates and dusty wooden boxes, and a long wooden staircase leads up to the shop where the bell above the door rings each time a customer comes or goes. Hogsmeade on Christmas was edged with a chill. Snowflakes drifted down unexpectedly, and Mad-Eye Moody looked up reflexively. "You two go back now. I can pretend I don't know about this." He spoke to the 2 young wizards before him, clearly not yet third years. They met the wildly turning magical eye and, still shaken, nodded. "Yes, sir. We'll go back now." They exchanged a quick, puzzled look but didn't stop. They ran off toward the other side of the village. At the same time, after climbing down the rope ladder, Hermione slipped from the residential area near the cabin and headed for Old Band's alchemy shop. The place had gone from almost deserted to busy in moments, and she visibly relaxed. She saw Moody not far away, but decided to act. From an inner pocket, she drew a bright orange-red feather. With a soft chirp, Corvus appeared on her shoulder. "Corvus, take me back to the castle," she whispered. The feather flashed, and both girl and Phoenix vanished. Moody watched the whole thing. When they were gone, his magical eyes slowed and stilled. He looked up at the falling snow with an expression that suggested he was thinking something over, perhaps admiring the youngster's cleverness. While Hermione left, a quieter kind of magic played out on the cabin's first floor. To an outsider, it might have seemed surprising, but the atmosphere in the sitting room had calmed, at least outwardly. "Purpose of your visit?" Lord Voldemort asked with a faint smile that only made his face more terrifying. Despite that, his manner was composed. "Eno, may I call you that? I understand this summer you met the famous Nicholas Flamel under the arrangement of a particular professor," he said. To lend weight to the claim, he produced a small 3-inch glass mirror from his pocket and idly stroked the decorative edge with pale fingers. What an extraordinary object. If I were your professor, I would have introduced such an excellent student to a legendary alchemist. Eno leaned back on the sofa and answered slowly. Of course, you may call me Eno, but that mirror is knowledge from those who came before. I only brought it back from history. He spoke without pride. The mirror's ideas had roots in the two-way mirror and the mirror of Erised. Even some alchemical insights were inspired by the single helix curve found in the two-way mirror. Voldemort smiled without committing, then steered the conversation on. Since you met Mr. Flamel, he must have told you that many high-end alchemical artifacts are incomplete, he said. And not just the great ones, ordinary objects, novelty items, props even. Many are the same. It's just that no one is willing to study them properly. He went on, listing sites and relics, Egyptian pyramids, pharaohs' tombs, the Mesopotamian plains, the civilizations between the rivers, even ruins left by giants in Albania, and the cultures of centaurs and merpeople. From the surviving relics, he said, everything showed the same gaps. His voice was calm, but threaded with regret. Eno listened, thoughtful. He had no reason to doubt Voldemort's words. A simple look could verify them, and the Philosopher's Stone and the Time Turner were indeed incomplete. As Voldemort paused, silence settled in the room. The fireplace became the focus. Logs crackled, flames danced, and cast a warm orange glow across the walls. After a long moment, Eno spoke. So, did you come all this way just to tell me that? He went on before Voldemort could reply. To be frank, I have no intention of acting on anything else. Given your current state, many things are already in the past. It was a guarded, almost conciliatory answer, one he had not made lightly. A rational Voldemort was not someone he wanted to provoke, not out of fear, but because it would be pointless. It made Eno a little bitter. The old headmaster probably couldn't outmaneuver the other man anymore. It was like watching two players at Wizard's chess. Dumbledore could only move one space by the rules, while Voldemort sometimes stepped outside them and took 2 or 3 moves at once. If skill levels were drastically different, those extra moves wouldn't matter. But here the players were in the same league. Voldemort was weaker, but not so weak as to be helpless. Voldemort laughed suddenly at Eno's apparent concession, an unnerving, bright sound from a terrifying face. We are true Slytherins. That's excellent. Even if you killed that king of snakes, it was but a Slytherin's pet. He meant the basilisk. Eno wasn't shocked. From the moment Voldemort mentioned the creature, he had expected that the Horcrux diary would be involved. 5 months had passed since summer. What had the other party discovered in that time? If Voldemort could speak of the basilisk, the diary's involvement was almost certain. From start to finish, Eno still couldn't fathom what had drawn Voldemort to him so persistently. He had ignored Harry and gone to great lengths to trace Eno's past preferences, even working to draw Dumbledore away. Why? Hogwarts during the holidays was a busy place. Even though many students had gone to Hogsmeade, the castle still thrummed with life. In the Gryffindor common room, Hermione appeared in a flash of orange-red light. Corvus, the phoenix, clasped to her. Merlin's beard, Ron shouted from a corner. Then, seeing who had materialized, he couldn't help muttering under his breath. She's not even married yet, and the phoenix is already hers? His comment wasn't loud, but it carried enough for several girls in the room to snort in annoyance. Hermione didn't have time to notice. The moment she confirmed she was back at Hogwarts, her first thought was to find help. She left the common room without hesitation, clutching Corvus tightly. On the 8th floor corridor, she paused in front of the fat lady's portrait, indecisive for a heartbeat. Time was pressing, and she wasn't sure who to seek out. Before she left the common room, she had meant to find Dumbledore, but the morning's Daily Prophet had said the headmaster was still at the International Confederation of Wizards. The pause passed. Determination set in. Corvus, take me to the castle's underground corridor, she said. Below stairs, the Slytherins noticed something unusual. A year earlier, a Gryffindor girl had broken into their territory single-handedly. She was back. But this time they didn't stand and gawk. Many stepped aside. Forget the ball last night. The Phoenix alone explained enough. Even if some students didn't recognize Dumbledore's Phoenix, The orange and red corvus was familiar from moving picture recordings of great events like the Quidditch World Cup. Hermione descended into the underground, made a quick adjustment, and headed toward the potions classroom door, holding Corvus all the while as if refusing to let it go. She knocked on Snape's office. At the same time, in a small house in Hogsmeade, Lord Voldemort made a request. In all the incompleteness, I saw completeness. Do you still have that die of yours? Eno blinked at the word die, then his face lit with understanding. The problem's root was clear. In the summer of his first year, to avoid being alone with Lord Voldemort, he had held that life-saving die in his hand. I still have it. He reached into his inner lining and produced the die. Voldemort's red eyes brightened. He stared at the small object like a pair of burning lamps. Yes, that's it. Of course. Behind completeness there must be complete rules. Ha! He laughed, a release of emotion and, more than anything, of satisfaction. A moment later, the laughter died down and his expression softened. Then, if possible, give the die to me. Galleons, gold, potions, anything at all. Name your price. Eno shook his head without hesitation. I'm sorry, but I haven't found anything more precious than this. He could have been tempted if the price and timing were right, but that die had not only saved his life, it was a coordinate to the world where Teacher Hans was, and a chance for him to be the protagonist of another story. Nothing short of a complete Philosopher's Stone would be enough to make him part with it. Voldemort did not react with anger. He replied calmly, almost politely. Unwilling? Very well. Thus, transactions require consent, not coercion. But I would like you to take me to the place where you found it, and the offer I made is still on the table. Name your price now. I don't imagine you will refuse twice. Eno felt trapped. He didn't want to provoke a rational Voldemort, and yet leading him to the place where the die was found could be catastrophic. If all the Horcruxes had been recovered, he might have risked it, but as far as anyone knew, only 6 were accounted for, and there were other allies and friends to consider. Hermione, Draco, Snape, and so on. It was a gamble he couldn't take. Voldemort watched him weigh the options and made no push, merely reaching for a paper bag and taking out a piece of candy to eat slowly. Time ticked away. As Voldemort unwrapped the third sweet, Eno said, "If you don't mind, please wait here for a moment, Senior," and vanished from his seat. The instant Eno disappeared, Voldemort sat up straight. The amused smile that had been on his face since the meeting began vanished. His red eyes narrowed and swept the room, taking everything in with sudden intensity. When Eno reappeared on the sofa, rhythmic applause filled the room. Incredible, truly incredible. Your excellence exceeds my expectations, Voldemort said, clapping his hands in genuine astonishment. Voldemort knew better than anyone how binding the apparition prohibition he had set up could be. Even Dumbledore would have to sit obediently in that room. The only way out was to walk on one's own feet. Eno didn't answer the praise. He reached into his pockets and laid several items on the coffee table, 3 glittering gems and another die. This one was a standard wooden 6-sided cube, the numbers 1-6 plainly carved on its faces, a far cry from the irregular polyhedral divination die he had produced earlier. Everything he placed there, the divination die, the scattered gems, had come from his own pockets. But returning to the sanctuary before Voldemort had been a deliberate choice. Magic could bind a phoenix, a house elf, even the Blue Lantern. It could not bind the uniqueness of the sanctuary. A careful display mattered far more than an immediate surrender. Eno preferred to see Voldemort's doubt and solemnity now, rather than his earlier confident swagger. With all due respect, Eno said, smiling, I still cannot fulfill your request, Senior. That place cannot be visited. However, these items may be exchanged. During Christmas, Hogsmeade was peaceful and serene. But today felt odd. Although it always snowed at this time of year, it was rare for the snowfall to continue non-stop from noon onward like it had been doing. Outside, wind and snow howled, burying everything in white. Inside the cottage, it was quiet and still. Perhaps because of his earlier disappearance, or for some other reason, Lord Voldemort did not immediately fly into a rage after being refused a second time. He first examined the gems and dice on the table with care, then allowed a hint of disappointment to show. Can't go? Tell me why, he said softly. Sitting on the sofa, Voldemort rubbed his brow with one finger. Going means death. To be honest, I don't particularly want that. It's simply not worth it. Eno replied calmly, his gaze never leaving Voldemort's. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. After a while, Voldemort spoke again. I believe you, he said slowly. But this worries me. Is it only death? Is there truly no solution? I don't know, Eno answered, shaking his head slightly. For now, it's a dead end. If I hadn't taken your nature into account, I would have tried to take you with me just now. Voldemort laughed, not with anger, but with approval. You really are a Slytherin. Then his tone shifted. You say you don't know, but does that mean a solution might exist? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't know, Eno said honestly. Over the years, he had never fully understood the sanctuary, the acromantula he controlled, the valley that had appeared, or even the Phoenix Fida under his command. He could not predict what might change. Besides, lying to people like Voldemort or Dumbledore was pointless, not merely because of legitimacy, but because even if you deceived them once, they would eventually unravel it. Unless the sanctuary allowed someone to leave this world completely, deception would be both naive and foolish. Voldemort leaned back on the sofa. Hearing Eno's answer, he nodded. I trust my instincts. They tell me you are not lying. I believe you. He sat up straighter, thought for a moment, then added, however, you will need to prove yourself worthy of that trust. As he spoke, an invisible pressure rose from him, so intense that the flames in the fireplace dimmed as if threatened. Eno felt the pressure, and a single word flashed through his mind. Ocean. The ocean that seems calm can suddenly unleash a furious swell. He didn't hesitate. The shadow beneath his feet boiled like ink and spread through the room like a black river. From that mist rose countless shadowy figures, skeletons in tattered armor, gripping spears, swords, shortbows, charging toward Voldemort. The abandoned, cursed mountain folk of Middle-earth had appeared in the wizarding world. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort intoned. The green beam of death lanced out and pierced several of the shadow soldiers. The killing curse did not destroy the Ink Shadow troops, but it passed through them unhindered. Eno saw the green light take aim at him and vanished from his spot, narrowly dodging the curse. Voldemort watched his opponent disappear and felt a small measure of relief. The moment he had cast Avada Kedavra, regret had flickered through him. His purpose for this visit was to learn the rules behind that die, not to slaughter. The sudden attack had been a display of power. Eno had vanished and reappeared to show his strength. Voldemort had meant to do the same, but the black mist and an instinctive irritation had made him fire the curse. Seeing his opponent evade it, he decided to stop before he did something he would later regret. But people are not always so temperate. Eno had been furious. Though he had barely avoided death, the taste of that brush with annihilation, and the knowledge that he had no dice in his possession then, stung. He gripped the life-saving dice in his hand and, with a decisive motion, left the sanctuary. His figure reappeared in the cottage. Hogsmeade, normally so calm at Christmas, suddenly lost that peace. A fierce, biting wind swept through town, carrying feather-like snowflakes that drained the landscape of color. The sky, which should have been bright in the afternoon, had at some point become choked with vast black smoke, turning noon into dusk. From that smoke poured hundreds of thousands of skeletal soldiers in medieval armor, weapons raised and faces twisted into savage expressions. No one had ever counted Hogsmeade's population precisely, but a fact remained. The number of wizards living there could account for more than 60% of England's wizarding community. In the face of what looked like a natural catastrophe, every wizard in the village lifted their eyes. About 30 meters above the ground, roughly 100 feet, two figures hung in midair without any visible means of support. At that height, they were clearly visible to everyone below. Eno, someone murmured. He's come back, another voice said. Swinburne. A name drifted through the crowd. Lord Voldemort, some whispered with fear. Students recognized Eno. Many adults remembered the name and the terror Voldemort had once brought to England. Hands reached for the quick caller mirrors and pointed them skyward. Mad-Eye Moody reacted instantly. He didn't worry about rounding up students then. He drew his wand and shouted, All students, now! Run to Hogwarts! Someone get to Professor McGonagall and tell her to raise the defenses. At the same time, he produced a coin that looked like a galleon, though a crude imitation. Its face was stamped with the abbreviation of the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Moody's shout snapped many young wizards out of stunned fascination. Ravenclaws streamed toward the castle without looking back. Still, many students stayed, transfixed, Slytherins among them, more numerous than the rest. Professor McGonagall was already on her broom along the only road to Hogsmeade, and two others rode with her. Phileas Flitwick, the Ravenclaw head and former international dueling champion, and Madame Maxime of Beauxbatons on an Abraxon. "Phileas, go down and oversee the student evacuation," McGonagall called as she pulled up and saw the two figures locked in confrontation high above the village and the panicked students below. Note about the Killing Curse, Avada Kedavra. The Killing Curse is the foremost of the three unforgivable curses and is a death curse, one of the most powerful and evil spells in the wizarding world. When cast, the wand emits a dazzling green light and the target dies instantly, usually without physical trace. On a living being, the curse causes immediate, painless death with no outward signs of violence. It is a cruel, dark art. Anyone caught using it on a human by the Ministry of Magic faces life imprisonment in Azkaban. The Killing Curse is generally unstoppable. Spells like the Shield Charm cannot resist it. On the road to Hogsmeade, Professor McGonagall's face went rigid the moment she saw the figure hovering in the distance. She could never forget that image, the man who alone had plunged the British Isles into more than a decade of darkness and terror. "Olim, take Phileas and fall back. I can handle Eno myself." She turned to Madame Maxime and issued the order without hesitation. The Beauxbatons headmistress was a foreign dignitary. She could not be allowed to remain in harm's way. McGonagall had assumed this was some ordinary act of malice, but the scene before her was far worse. And still, countless students in Hogsmeade had not evacuated in time. After directing the two, McGonagall steeled herself and flew toward Hogsmeade alone. As she neared the village, the snowflakes in the sky abruptly stopped, not the snow ceasing to fall, but every flake suspended midair at once. Feather-like flakes began to rotate slowly, all turning clockwise as if steered by an invisible hand. Every witch and wizard in Hogsmeade, including several professors, watched in stunned silence. Up above, Eno seemed to have become a god of ice and snow. Countless flakes swirled around him, gathering into a white curtain that surged through the sky. Then, like a living tide, it rushed toward Lord Voldemort, who hovered opposite him. As the mass of snow streamed out, the flakes changed form. No longer ordinary snow, they became pure white billywigs, an entire sea of insects, each sporting an inch-long stinger. Higher still, like a cloud of boggart black mist, the cursed mountain folk unleashed their assault. Hundreds of archers drew and loosed, while legions armed with spears and swords swept down like specters. Eno was holding nothing back. The brush with death had forced him to unleash everything he had. Though enraged, he kept his reason. He did not let the black mist descend on Hogsmeade, nor did he call for Fide, since countless witches and wizards below were clearly in danger. As the insect sea and the undead mountain folk converged, Voldemort raised his wand. "Protego! Bombarda!" Calm and precise, Voldemort used the most appropriate spells. The exploding charm is often underestimated, but as the experts knew, it can devastate a wide area when properly wielded. A dazzling scarlet beam, as thick as a baby's arm, shot from the tip of his wand. It looked less like a spell than a bolt of lightning tearing the sky. In an instant, it struck the white tide of billywigs. The beam plunged into them like a red-hot iron skewer into cheese, and for a moment, the expected explosion did not occur. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then a thunderous boom. A series of deafening detonations followed, reverberating through the air. Wizards below felt the ground tremble. Many wizards recovered from shock and began to retreat. A curious number of them, though already mounted on broomsticks, still clutched a 3-inch film mirror in one hand, lens pointed steadily at the two combatants. Even in a crisis, some could not resist recording the spectacle. None of that affected the duel above. The explosions destroyed much of the billywig swarm and felled many of the mountain folk, but Eno did not flinch. The billywigs had been formed from snow, and the mountain folk condensed from the boggart mist. Both were essentially consumable, renewable forces. "Winter is coming," he cried, and struck his wand again. This time he spoke aloud, drawing on the Elder Wand in his hand to unleash the second of his ice and snow inheritances. The sky over Hogsmeade, and even Hogwarts itself, fell into a blizzard. It was not gentle snowfall. The heavens seemed to split, and accumulated snow poured down like a torrent. Wind and ice whipped together until the flakes were almost suffocatingly dense. In short order, the entire horizon was swallowed in white. The partially destroyed Billywig swarm was instantly replenished, and as if energized, they swelled to 10 times their former size. The white ocean reformed and rushed forward again. Frost shot, Eno barked, and with that he unleashed the first magic of his inheritance. He had once nearly abandoned this nearly physical, projectile-like spell after learning Sectum Sempra, but facing Voldemort had brought it back. In the right environment, he was no longer limited to a few weak arrows. Behind him, countless pale blue ice bolts condensed, 10,000 arrows or more, and fired in an endless hail, each forming as the previous one sped away. The barrage, combined with the insect tide, gave the impression of ants devouring a dragon. Despite forming this overwhelming assault, Eno did not drop his guard. Voldemort's methods in the hut had shown him what true lethality looked like. The killing curse could arrive in an instant with a simple flick of the wrist. If not for the sanctuary's protection, that last Avada would have ended him. Thinking of the way Voldemort had even pulled out divination dice, only to send a killing curse after him, stoked a cold fury in Eno. He adjusted his posture in midair, using the Boggart mist for cover and firing from unpredictable angles. Sectum Sempra! Sectum Sempra! He chanted over and over, sending invisible cutting curses streaking toward Voldemort. He had already settled on a strategy during their earlier clash: keep Voldemort constantly occupied with a barrage of continuous attacks. No matter how powerful a spell, if a witch or wizard is never given the chance to cast it, that power is effectively useless.